always does what it wants to do. Good evening. Welcome to the church of everybody sitting on one side. I know. I just had to say something. And I greet you tonight in the name of all that is good, all that is holy, and all that is sacred, and in the warm and loving energy of this ministry, Spiritual Life Center. And if this is your very first time with us tonight, we especially want to welcome you because we know that you are not here by accident. Every person here and every person live streaming is here by divine appointment. And I'm just really excited to have everyone here with us tonight. I'd like to introduce Gabriella. She is one of our chaplains, and she's going to lead us in our opening prayer.
Thank you. Let's take in a deep breath, centering ourselves in this beautiful sanctuary. Dear Father, Mother, co-creators of our lives, we are so blessed to be here tonight, coming through the light into the dark and through the light again, as spring nears its beautiful time to us. We bless each and every one here and all our friends and loved ones, and we send blessings and prayers to people that we know who need healing. We are grateful to be here. Amen.
Amen. I did bring the announcements up with me. So those cell phones and other electronic gadgets, would you please silence them? Especially our guest. The chaplains will have their healing circle next door right after this service, so be sure to go add on to whatever it is you gather energy from in this event. And on Saturday, March 30th and Monday, April 3rd, and I don't have times, but on that Saturday and that Monday, we're having a clean day. So we're going to clean the church and scrub walls, and I think we're not painting. We don't want to paint just before Easter, but we're going to clean before Easter. So I know that you can sign up on Sunday. There'll be a clipboard out in the breezeway, but otherwise, you might want to just call the office and tell people that you're interested and get signed up for that. Next week, I'm having somebody else do the microclass. Paul Sanchez, who is a really gifted and talented teacher, is going to be doing a program called There's a B-Sides Too, and it's based on music. So, you know, there was the A-side, and remember the old, right, so there's the A-side and the B-side. And it's like, ever been just in a really not great place, and then you're walking through a store and the song comes on, and all of a sudden you connect to it? He's going to walk us through 3 different songs, and I believe he's actually done this for the men's group, 3 different songs, and really just talk about how does that touch you and what does it do. And this is not sacred music, this is popular music, so it'll be a really cool kind of turn on that. Yeah, so love to see you for that next week. So Monte and I have had several conversations. He sent me emails, and we never got a bio on him, so I don't have a long introduction to do, and I think what we'll do is just bring Monte right up here, and as we go along, you'll learn more about Monte Richardson. Welcome, Monte.
Yes, and I was supposed to send her a bio, and then I forgot all about it, so.
And of course, I keep track of this, and it goes on everybody's permanent record when they don't. I love how we didn't light the candles. We've got lighting stuff here. It's just Thank you, Jeannie. So, welcome, Monte.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really thrilled to have you up here and to do this. I have to say that when we were talking yesterday, I had sort of misadvertised what we were going to be talking about tonight, because it wasn't really that Monte had a bad childhood. He had a great childhood, and then things got kind of icky, and then they got better again. And so that's how he came up with From Here to Eternity. So my first question is really, did you grow up in spirituality? Was there a religion? What kind of thing got you started?
Okay. I grew up I'm from Port Arthur, Texas. I grew up, my father worked for Texaco. My mother stayed home. There were 5 of us over many years. I think 21 years to be exact. My older sister left home when she was, to get married when she was in her early 20s, I think, and she and my mother were really close. And my mother said, well, that's okay. I'll just have another one. Now, she was 40 years old at this time. And this was, you didn't do this then. This was around 1947, I guess. So she got pregnant and she had twins at 40. My father was 45. So that's how I was born on January 20th, and it snowed on that day in Port Arthur, Texas. That doesn't happen every year, maybe every 15 years. So, and I was a twin, as I said.
And were you taken right into, did you grow up in a church, or did you?
Oh, yes, I grew up in a church. My mother made sure of that.
What kind of church?
It was a Methodist church. It was actually, the Methodist church then was fairly liberal. Parts of it were. I mean, parts of it are certainly not today. And it was, it had been a very wealthy church in the early days, and there was money in a refinery town. So it had beautiful stained glass windows and perfect acoustics. And I was happy there. I had a happy childhood. I was happy there till I got to a certain point in life, and the Bible didn't really do it for me. I thought there were wonderful things in the Bible, and I thought it was more the Word of man than the Word of God.
And you were pretty young when that
That
realization started happening for you, weren't you?
That probably started happening when I was fairly young. It was in strong force when I was 12 years old. And that was what, I was very happy through the 7th grade. And then when adolescence hit, I began to think about things. And number one, I'm bisexual. Well, that was very disturbing to me at that time. That was a very different time. I had profound questions that were like, I questioned the existence of God even, and I questioned the meaning of life without that. That was profoundly disturbing to me, and I remember there were times when I would just lie in bed at night and shake. It was very frightening. So that triggered a depression for me, and I dealt with it pretty much on my own, because I think I told my parents at one time, and they did both of these things. And I mean, what are they to do? Because how do you answer those questions? We're probably better equipped to answer those questions today than we were then, but they're still difficult questions to answer. So I dealt with this on my own pretty much, and in school, in college, I buried myself in my studies. I was embarrassed about my academic performance after high school. So I changed that, and I made 6 Bs when I was an undergraduate. And I was a math and physics major, because I would have majored in history and English if I had done what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be able to get a job when I finished.
As all of us English majors know, it was probably a good decision.
So then I got a fellowship, and I went to the University of Illinois, and I got my master's degree there in mathematics, and I had a teaching assistantship. And that was the first time I had ever been away from home. So.
Well, Okay, the question just went out of my head. So did you threw yourself into your studies
Yes.
to deal with the depression, right?
Right.
And so basically, what I understand you to be telling us is that you had this really wonderful childhood, and then at some point, life just lost all meaning for you, and you didn't understand why you were here or what you were doing.
Right.
And that was that you just pretty much crashed and burned, except that you saved yourself through going through college.
Right.
Is that-
And I you know, I was always a fairly decent student, so that saved myself in high school too. Because the very worst of that was probably in high school.
That was in the early 60s.
In the early 60s, yes.
Yeah, we both graduated high school the same year, so it was like 3 weeks ago. So during this time that you were immersing yourself in your studies, were you working anything out, or did it just sort of lay there and you got through school, and then when did you start to shift?
It didn't really work anything out. I didn't really start to shift until I went away to graduate school. And then my sexuality was how I escaped from that. And that was when I was, when I was away from home finally. And that was actually the way it was for many years. I was an agnostic by then. I was not an atheist. When I came home, I would go to church with my mother. I wouldn't generally go to church when I was away from home. So nothing really significant changed until I was in my early 40s. And I had, before that, I had a twin brother. We were very close. He was my best friend. He was an artist. He was very creative, but he was very successful. Not, in terms of making a lot of money, but his art was very well received critically. He had a gallery in Houston. He had a lot of friends. I'm an introvert very much. He was an extrovert. And anyway, so in 1983, he to make a living, he sold his paintings, but mainly to make a living, he installed art in museums and galleries. So he was on a trip to Austin, and he was mugged, and he was gagged, tied and gagged, and he suffocated to death. And that was a major thing, or it led to a major thing. So I didn't really deal with that. I didn't know to deal with that at the time. I didn't know how important it is to grieve something like that.
That was also another part of the times as well.
Yeah, that was a part of the times.
I mean, it's like.
So a couple of years later, I met a man who was an incredible mystic. I was highly skeptical. And one day, he said to me, I don't know why, but ever since I've met you, I've started using the word indeed a lot. And he said, I'm going to find out why. So he went, he had a place where he had clients, and he had a desk there, and he went and sat down at the desk, and he went into a meditation. And my twin brother started talking. And I say that because nobody knew what he started talking about. But the first thing he said was, "It is more wonderful than anything you can imagine." And he was talking about where he was. And then he went on to say, he was working with a man who had taken his life. He was trying to help him. But when this happened, something clicked. It was like I remembered something. It was like, it's like I remembered something from the other side almost. because all of my agnosticism just sort of went poof. And so that's really when my life changed. And then I had, maybe I need to stop and see if there's another question.
No, I think had you really become agnostic, or were you just sort of ignoring God? The whole
Well,
other side.
it couldn't be laid out to me in a manner that was satisfactory.
It couldn't be laid out for me in a manner that was satisfactory. I'm going to remember that because that's perfect. Okay. I love the way you talk, Monte. Okay, so this started, something happened here that started to make sense to you.
Yes.
And you started on, but you didn't know what you were remembering, did you? You just
No.
know something sounded familiar, something
No,
sounded,
I knew very little then.
but it felt right.
Yeah, and I started getting an education because I was around somebody who read everything, who had studied this book. We used to go and walk around this big park in Houston, Memorial Park, a little bit after dark usually. It was a nice place to walk. And Bruce would talk to our spirit guides. And anyway, so one night they said, there is an extraterrestrial being who wants to work with you. And so Bruce said he was willing, but he was skeptical. I mean, he was very careful about what he did. So anyway, we started doing this, and usually on Friday nights, he'd go into a meditation and he'd go into a trance, and this being would come in and take over his body and give me a discourse. This went on for about a year. So that's what I mean when I say I got an education in a hurry. I got really sort of a summary of all the metaphysical teachings, and that he wanted to impart to me.
Did you write all that down?
Oh, I do have it. Yeah,
You
it was
did
all
write it?
it was all recorded.
It was recorded, okay.
And I started to read that before, but it's fairly basic stuff actually. But it wasn't basic stuff to me at that time. And so then I was. That changed my life really, and it got me on a path. I started going to the big Unity Church in Houston, which was I think Christ Church Unity at the time. Now it's Unity of Houston. And I had a lot of friends there, and it was a good thing for me. So that's when my spiritual path started, really.
Oh, it's up to me. Well, you're pointing at this book, but I know that before we get to this book, you said that you ran into the Urantia book, but you didn't delve into it, and you went into A Course in Miracles first, right?
Oh yes, okay. Well, there was a huge bookshelf. I mean, it took up a whole wall of books, of spiritual books, where I lived, and so I read a whole lot of those, and then I wanted to read this, but there is a place in A Course in Miracles where it says, this is a required course. Now, I don't think it means that you have to read that book. I think it means you need to learn somehow what that book teaches. And however you learn it, you may learn it on the streets. I don't know, but anyway, that's why I didn't do this first. So I spent about 5 years on A Course in Miracles, pretty much immersed in that. And most of it I was reading on my own. I wasn't part of a spiritual group so much at that time. I was later. And then I didn't really, that happened and that was still going on when I first moved to California in 1992.
So explain to us what the Urantia book is in 10 words or less. That's a joke. So how would you describe this book?
Okay. I would describe it as it is described. It is, first of all, to put it in simple terms, it's knowledge. It's very concrete. It is a spiritual teaching, but it is actually about, for example, the life of Christ. Who is Christ as a spiritual being? Who was he? And what is the real significance of that? What is a description of the grand universe as it currently exists? There are, and I'll talk about that a little bit, a description of the Isle of Paradise. Paradise is a literal physical place. It's the largest physical mass in the entire universe. This is all stuff that's in the book. I shouldn't be speaking it as its truth, probably, because that might be offensive to somebody. So it's knowledge, it's facts. And there are basically 4 sections of this book. There's the super universe, which we are a part. There are about 7 trillion inhabitable worlds, according to the Urantia book. That means planets like this. The entire universe rotates around the Isle of Paradise, which is motionless. But it is a physical, literal place. So the first section is on the central and super universe. There are 7 what are called super universes, each of which has approximately 1 trillion inhabitable worlds. Now, why the number 7? Does anybody have any idea? Okay, 7 is the number of associations of the Trinity with itself: the Father, the Son, the Spirit, the Father, the Son, the Spirit, the Father, the Son, the Spirit. So there is a spiritual being for each of those who is essentially called an Ancient of Days, in charge of each one of the super universes. We're a part of the 7th super universe. It's the name they give to it is Orvanton, Ovorton. The second section of the book is the local universe. We're part of a local universe, which consists of about 10 million inhabitable worlds. Now, this is significant because we're going to talk about the life of Christ. So we're part of 10 million inhabitable worlds. The being who was really responsible for the creation of that is the being who incarnated as Jesus of Nazareth. That was his 7th incarnation as one of his creatures. And that is he did that because it's a requirement for a creator son to incarnate as one of his creatures 7 times before he has full sovereignty over his own creation. So when he incarnated as Jesus and completed that, even before he completed it, he was successful. So, yes.
I was just wondering, do you know who the... Wait, we need a mic, because we're live streaming and people can't hear you.
Thank you. I was wondering if you know if it says who the other incarnations were.
Oh,
if
it
they're-
does. Yes, it does. But
Can you tell us?
they aren't human beings.
Okay,
I could find
from
that.
other planets?
No, not us. They aren't human beings. They're human beings of our type, different from us, but similar on other planets.
Okay,
But
thank
he
you.
was like a Melchizedek once, and all of these personalities are identified. So okay, now where was I? We were talking about the local universe. So the significance of that, and this is a big deal because he has sovereignty now. He could do whatever he wanted to do, and I don't know, but I think that it gives me a great deal of comfort, actually, even though all kinds of craziness may yet happen on this planet. But there is order in the universe. There's an authority in this book which is, in some ways, very comforting.
So I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of them is, okay, so the first thing is we could probably say that the Urantia book is something that lays it out satisfactorily for you.
For me, and I'm not I have never
Well-
read the complete thing, but yes.
Well,
it's
anybody who's read the complete, this is not the easiest book to read. And I just want to back up for a second because there are people who say that this book has been channeled, and you say it is not a channeled book. And
Yeah.
what is the difference? Because I think it's important for people to understand where it came from, and then we can go back into the book a little
Okay.
more.
In a sense, and I haven't said this until I started reading something last night. In a sense, it isn't absolutely known how this was created, but what happened is this: there was a group of seekers in Chicago, very intellectual people. They had quite a bit of money because the book needed to come through. So, and they were seekers actually. It was a doctor and his wife, and anyway, basically what happened is the papers would appear. There are 196 papers in this book. Each of them has an author. So the first time it happened, there was a man in his sleep state. And he's the same man that they all came through in some manner. They couldn't wake him when he was sleeping, and they didn't know why. His family couldn't. So they called the doctor, and he came over, and he couldn't wake him either. So anyway, these papers, which were handwritten on just appeared by his bedside table. And they aren't sure how this happened, but this is the speculation, and part of this is documented in the book. Each of us has within us, each of us who is, has a normal mind, has within us a fragment of God the Father. It's pre-personal. It doesn't have personality, but it's like a mind sort of thing. What the author, what is thought is that the midwayers, or no, the midwayers the authors of these papers would write the papers to the mind, to the fragment of that person in his sleep. There are spiritual beings who are halfway between us and the angelic realms. They can manipulate the physical. They could read what was written to that man's mind, and they could transcribe it on paper. So the theory is in this book that appeared by that means. That is, the midwayers would actually write this down. They would receive the papers would arrive on the desktop, and they would be typed up and proofread, and there was no punctuation in the papers. So punctuation would be added. And then the original would be put back in a locked safe. And then the original would disappear. So that's sort of what is known about this. I say it isn't it says it isn't a channeled work, but it came through in that manner. And I think, this is just my own opinion, they didn't want it to come through the personality circuit. And also it's labels itself as the fifth apocalyptic revelation. Because it's apocalyptic just because of its significance. And I could read some stuff about apocalyptic revelations in here, but let's see, where was I? Anyway, I think that's the main thing to know is it is a very significant revelation, and I don't think they wanted it to be channeled. I was told by my teacher very early on that if they wanted to communicate with us, and they could do it. They had ways of doing it, other than, and if they wanted it to be precise, it could be precise.
So have you read the entire book?
No, I have not read the entire book.
This is not a book that you sit down and, has anybody tried to read it? Anybody?
Would you like to say something about that?
Well, when I read a book, I like to start at the beginning and read right through it to the end. So I started with the foreword. And I got to tell you, don't read the foreword. They use as an excuse. I studied it. I got the meaning out of it, and I could translate it into English, and it would be a third as long as it is, and it would be totally clear. I'm an editor. I could edit the daylights out of that thing. It would take me the rest of my life to do that, but I could do it. And I have two very intellectual friends. One of them wrote a book called The Embodied Self, but she studied all this stuff, and it's full of that kind of stuff. And another one has her PhD in ancient cultures from Berkeley. And they both tried to read it. And the one that wrote the book, she was in with the group for a while, and never mind. And the other, my friend in Berkeley, I mean, she learned ancient English so that she could understand Chaucer when she was 12 years old. So she's got that kind of money. No way is she going to read this book. So finally, Monte persuaded me to read about Jesus Christ because I have some background. I could sort of figure that out. So I started reading the section that leads up to his crucifixion. Actually, that was the reading, was called the crucifixion. I'm very impressed. The Bible covers the crucifixion in a couple of pages. This book is what, 3,000?
It's 2096.
Well, I would round that off to 3,000 and not feel guilty. So, but it was an easy read. So I'm more open to reading the rest of it too. But my tendency is, what happened before Jesus? And then he's talking about as soon as I read that, then Monty says, well, read the part that explains who Jesus was. And he keeps giving me other things. I can't keep up with it. I've got 5 other books that I'm working on at the same time. So, but this is a very good book. It really.
But I agree with you that finding the area, part of it, I think, is reading the parts that you have some sort of frame of reference for.
Yeah.
So the beginning parts with the structure of the universe and everything, it's like, in some respects, you're going, yeah, right, because it's not anything that we're familiar with. I read the Adam and Eve story, and there's parts of that made a lot of sense to me.
It does make sense, yeah.
But there is a book called the Urantia Papers, and I got that on electronic version, and that's sort of like, or there's one of them that somebody went through, and they did some editing and made it more readable.
Yeah,
and then you can go back
there's
to
a condensed version.
Yeah,
of this.
yeah. So yeah.
No.
I like going to the horse's mouth. That's why I like the Urantia book. Yeah.
Well, I like. I would say if you're going to read this, I mean, some people can read. I can read that, the foreword, but I would meditate before I read it. I was told to meditate before I read it. I would say if you're going to read this, start with the chapter, the 4th section, which is the life of Christ. And you could. I adventured in this book, like. I would find something that I was interested in, and I would read that. And I did that for many, many years. The stuff on Satan and what is that called? Anyway, the section on, there's basically a section on Satan. And that was very meaningful to me, because a lot of that is about the mercy of God. And I say that because of it explains who Lucifer and Satan were as spiritual beings. They weren't human beings, but they were sons. They acknowledged Jesus as their father. But what they did resulted not in people's physical death, but in their death, their real death. In other words, they ceased to exist.
Their soul death.
Yes, their soul death. And what they did that as a result of what Lucifer and Satan did. And that to me was a revelation of the mercy of God because that was allowed to go on. It was also allowed to go on because more good would result by allowing it to end in its own way than by intervening.
So that brings me to another question. In the everyday world, I get the idea that as you started going to Unity and studied the Course in Miracles and then got into the Urantia book, that the depression started to lift and you started having a life again.
Oh, yeah.
So how does this all work to make this world more make more sense to you? How did you've taken this now and you use this in your everyday life? What is, I mean, it's a tool for you, right?
It's a tool for me, but it's a tool for me because I'm somebody who, to whom understanding is very important. So that's why this is important to me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book to many people. I would recommend it to somebody who is really a seeker. But like nobody in my family would, consider this. I do have a family. The rest of my family is Jewish. My wife is Jewish. She's come here before, but not recently. And she's in graduate school in San Francisco 4 days a week. My son is a junior at McClatchy, and my daughter is a junior at St. Mary's in Morago. So, but my son might eventually be interested in this. I don't know. My wife is very Jewish. We usually go to the high holiday service at B'nai Israel.
So do you think in part being older, more mature, has something to do with being able to relate to this? I mean, when I first started in Unity back in 1975, 74, I was 25, and I was one of the youngest people in the church. We had a few children, but not many. And the average age of the church back then was 42 or 44. And most, we're always wanting to bring young people into Unity because we want to keep it going. But the truth is that we need to get past well, you had your kids later in life, but still the job and the kids and it's at some point we need to get some life behind us and then also just have the time to be able to be open to this. Do you think that has any relevance?
Well, I think this is, okay, I think what's taught in this is important. I think there needs to be a Cliff Notes version of it, to be frank, because I do think it's important. Like, there are things that we teach here that I'm kind of, I think just are not true. And I think some people would take great comfort in the teachings that are here and the significance of the life of Christ. That's a bigger deal than we teach. He's a lot more than just our way shower. And so I think there's some of these teachings are very important and would provide comfort to a lot of people. But I don't think you'll get many people reading it. It's a challenge to read. I mean, some people are just drawn to it. I was drawn to it, but not very many.
Thank you again. There is a book club near our church that studies the way of the Master.
Yes.
I wondered if you have an opinion on that.
I haven't read that, but I would say the same thing about that I'd say about the Course in Miracles. I mean, it's great. I think that's supposedly, that was written by the Christ, right? Supposedly. Mm-hmm. And I would tend to believe that. The same thing of the Course in Miracles.
But I have the book.
I mean, I would say what I said about myself, that those things are probably required. Those things are things you should study, you should learn from. And it's probably more, this is knowledge, which is fine, but the other stuff is probably more important as a place to start.
Because you have to bring the intellect and the heart together.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And I have a feeling that if you can, and I don't know why I say this because I have barely cracked little bits of this book myself, but I have a feeling that if you could get in there, especially the part about the life of Jesus, is that you do find the heart in there. You can
Yeah.
find the heart, but probably starting elsewhere first, or in combination with, because none of these, I remember when A Course in Miracles first came out, the people who produced that kept saying it is not the Course in Miracles, it is a Course in Miracles, and they were adamant that they didn't want it to become what it in some place it has become. It's a Course in Miracles, it's not the only one. And A Way of Mastery is not the only one, and we all hear it differently.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like Monte I think you can hear this book.
Yeah, I can hear it. I can hear
speaks
it.
to you.
It speaks to me, right.
Right.
But I don't think it would speak to everybody. And
Yeah.
although I do think there's information in here which at some point the planet will need to evolve. But that may be 1,000 years from now.
And in Monte and I've had some long talks, and it's like helping, what we teach here at SLC helps us to deal with all of the stuff that's going on in the world. But there is a logic to the universe. Whatever the universe is, there's a logic to it. And to be able to read something that actually shows you that there's some logic is kind of comforting.
Right.
You know, at the same time, the vocabulary, it's like I can tell that they were probably talking to an intellectual because they use that intellectual's vocabulary.
Oh,
But
and
still,
I
it's so-
should read.
okay.
Yeah.
So after Monte does this, we'll just open this up to other questions.
Well, anyway, there's a place where they make
They make
some almost denigrating remarks about our language. They talk about the
about
the circumscribed language of the realm. Let's see. This is the beginning of the forward. In the minds of the mortals of Urantia, that being, excuse me, I need glasses. Where's my? That being the name of your world, there exists great confusion respecting the meaning of such terms as God, divinity, and deity. Human beings are still more confused and uncertain about the relationships of the divine personalities designated by these numerous appellations. Because of this conceptual poverty associated with so much ideational confusion, I have been directed to formulate this introductory statement in explanation of the meanings which should be attached to certain word symbols as they may be hereinafter used in these papers, which the Orvanton Corps of Truth Revealers have been authorized to translate into the English language of Urantia. Okay, wait, I want to see what this is. Okay, this is one more sentence. It is exceedingly difficult to present in large concepts and advanced truths in our endeavor to expand cosmic consciousness and enhance spiritual perception when we are restricted to the use of a circumscribed language of the realm.
And yet, that's why we're here. We're here. This is what we've got. This is what we work with, and so they get to work with us. So there. Questions? Okay, Mary, and then.
Well, I've studied the Edgar Casey readings, and I've been in a Search for God group that a spiritual study group with the Edgar Casey readings, and a lot of what Casey would say in trance was kind of stilted and archaic and awkward language. But once you get used to it, it's not really a problem. You get used to it and you go with it. It's kind of like when you read Shakespeare. It takes a little getting used to, but once you're more experienced with it and you have a dictionary handy, then you can enjoy it more. And so is it kind of like that with this book, that after you're more familiar with it, it becomes easier to understand?
I would say two things. Yes, it becomes easier to understand, but I would also say we are the probably lowest form of intelligent life.
We don't like hearing that, do we?
But it's true. So these are coming down to us, and from not just our local universe level, but from the super universe. They're from So there are challenges in that translation. And this whatever this was had to be translated from a super universe where that has its own language. When we get up there in our ascension scheme, because this book is largely about the ascension scheme, we will speak a different language. We will be transformed many times before we get there. Then there's the language of the local universe, which is different things. Then there's the English language. So this had to go through several translations to get to us. So I think that is part of the difficulty that we're seeing.
I have that microphone, so I'm going to
Okay,
speak.
we have time for you and one other person. Go
I
ahead.
just want to say very quickly that introduction or forward was very clear. We are limited by our words, and they're just letting us know that our language is very limited, and that's very clear.
And it's one of the reasons that we use so many symbols, I think. It's like, when I write a meditation, the meditation runs like a movie in my head. And then I have to translate it into words to come up here on Sunday and give it back out again. And the hardest thing to do for me, is to get that picture that I've got running and bring that vibration down so I can turn it into words. So, okay, Avenel, and then Lynn, and then we're done.
Monty, I'm Avenel, and you and I have not met. So I know of you, but I don't know you. And I certainly, anyway, that's not my point. My point is, I am a seeker, but I am not interested in that book. I know that I'm not. So but doesn't mean that I'm not a seeker.
No, not at all.
No. So what I have learned in Deborah's Thursday class,
Right.
because I love the safety of being able to say anything and you're not right or you're not wrong. We just get to express.
Right.
So in that class, I have learned that it is through being uncomfortable that pushes me forward, because I know that internally that I don't need, I get comfort from internal, not
Right.
not
Not external.
not external. I
Right.
mean, that's where my comfort comes.
Yes. Uh-huh.
My deep comfort, my core, my soul. So,
Monty said a whole lot when he said that he meditates and then he reads this book. I was in a study group of a book kind of like that. I can't remember the name of it, maybe the Book of Enoch or something
Yeah.
like that. But it was a group that was put together by a guy who was head of the physics department in a local junior college down in San Jose, which has got the Rosicrucian Museum and blah, blah, we're all psychic stuff. And our assignment was, we would read a hunk of the book at home, and then we'd come and study it. And as I was reading the book, it was like, yeah. Well, this is so obvious. Why did he even bother to write it? Then we would get together and discuss what I had read. And it was led by this physics professor who was very mental. And we were all, including the professor, we were all in complete confusion of the same thing that I had read totally clearly. My take on that is that my soul already knows this stuff. But we are on the material plane, and when you talk about, I forget which one of you said something about the death of the soul, when anybody who's known somebody whose soul has died, it's an extremely sad thing. Yeah. But I think Urantia is a lot like that. But I wish that Monty would read some passage from anywhere but the foreword, because it really is not like that.
You'll have to do it quickly.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh God.
And Raphael, did you have a question? Jeannie, could you run back while Monty is looking for his
The
passage?
crucifixion.
Read something from Adam and Eve. That's,
I was
you
gonna
know, the
read-
other thing
What about
that-
the crucifixion?
Okay, that's, what I noticed in just sort of,
825?
in sort of just wandering through the book is that there are some areas of the book that the language is much easier than
Oh,
other
yeah.
parts of the book. Yes, Raphael?
Yeah, I have a question. He said that we are the lowest form of living.
Of intelligent life.
intelligence.
And the animals are above us?
No,
Also,
we're the lowest form of intelligent life. But there are many, the universe is teeming with life. There are billions, probably. There's a place where they talk about what's not revealed in here, and they give a list of spiritual beings who are not. Okay.
Yeah, we are.
Who are not here. Anyway, so we're the lowest form of intelligent life. That doesn't mean, most of the authors of these papers are above us as spiritual beings. Or they may not even be a part of our local universe. They may be a part of the super universe.
But if you think of it in terms of vibration as opposed to just, physical hierarchy, it's a vibrational thing, right? I mean, we can't even see them. We can't even feel them because the vibration
Yeah.
is so much higher. Isn't that part of it?
Well,
It's
it's
just
just that we aren't endowed with, when we pass away, when we go through the portal of life, then we'll be able to see them.
right,
But we don't
because-
have the kind of sight that would be required to see them. I mean, some people are gifted, like we have JG sitting here. Maybe he can see them to some degree, or communicate.
We're going to,
Okay.
I do readings, as you well know. And sometimes I'm in contact with, I call them beings of light.
Yeah.
And I say that from other galaxies, but that pales in comparison to where they're actually from. And usually the information comes without the words. It comes with a knowing that has to be distilled by me. And, there's a translation that happens. And it's given to me so simply that I understand that I'm only translating like maybe 1% of what I was actually being given to give. And that 1% is enough to wow you. So that lets me know that it's coming from a source that's far more advanced. That's all I can say about it. So I say beings of light because that's how they appear
Yeah,
to me.
right.
I can't, there's no form or anything to them, but.
and it's just there, isn't it, JJ?
Yeah, it's just,
There's just this presence, and yeah.
and,
Have you-
and it's indistinguishable. Each one has almost like a personality to it, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
that we
Yeah.
can't understand here.
Okay, this is,
I'll read a little bit of this.
Okay.
The thief on the cross. This is from the crucifixion, the chapter on the crucifixion. One of the brigands railed at Jesus, saying, "If you are the Son of God, why do you not save yourself and us?" But when he reproached Jesus, the other thief, who had many times heard the Master teach, said, "Do you have no fear even of God? Do you not see that we are suffering justly for our deeds, but that this man suffers unjustly? Better that we should seek forgiveness for our sins and salvation for our souls." When Jesus heard the thief say this, he turned his face toward him and smiled approvingly. When the malefactor saw the face of Jesus turned toward him, he mustered up the courage, fanned the flickering flames of his faith, and said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And then Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say to you today, you shall sometime be with me in paradise."
That's very understandable.
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So, at some point, Monty is talking about doing a class on that part of the book, the life of Jesus. So stay tuned. We'll see when that comes around.
And I would, if you have any input to give me on that, because it's sort of a daunting thing to take on, to know what to do and what makes sense to do. So I appreciate feedback.
something about doing a little dipping your toe into the Rio Rancho book.
Oh, yeah.
So, Monte, this has been fascinating. Thank you so
Oh.
much for doing this.
And I should apologize. I'm not accustomed to speaking in public. I'm an introvert, so
Okay,
I
so-
felt sort of awkward up here. But anyway.
There's a rule whenever you're doing something with me is never apologize.
Oh.
It was absolutely marvelous, and thank you so much. So this is our time, obviously, that we move into our love offering. And we keep things in circulation by giving and receiving. And I was talking one Sunday about, I'd heard the song that was, it's better to give than to receive. But you know what? If you're not receiving as well as giving, you break the cycle. And so we lovingly receive, you lovingly give, and then we lovingly give back. So let us take our offering in our hands together and offering in our hands and say our offertory blessing together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I circulate. Thank you, God.
Oh, this is easy today. Oh. Oh. Jerry. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, if I can drink.
So stand, join hands, become connected as you can.
Oh.
Let's see, let's make a circle. See if we can the people in back come up here and connect with us? We don't want to leave Phil by himself. Oh, that's all right, I forgot Phil was back there. It's all good. Let's take a deep breath. Thank you, Monte, for being here tonight. And let's say our prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. And may the joys of the world go with you. Good night.